Gravity Rush has always been one of those games that seems like it should be bigger than it is. Being initially released on the PS Vita didn't really do it any favours on that front, but the game garnered enough support to warrant a PS4 remaster. The basic premise is this: you play as Kat with a K, an amnesiac who soon discovers that she can manipulate the effects of gravity around her, all thanks to this cute wee cat. What happens after is pretty standard video game fare. There's a story with conflict, drama, and so on, but that isn't what I'm wanting to talk about today. Instead, I'd like to focus on something else. Let's have a chat about the idea of power in video games, and how Gravity Rush approaches such a vast and nebulous theme. So, the game starts off in quite an interesting place, because from the get-go, Kat's abilities mirror your own. That is, if we attribute some sort of individual agency to her, alongside you as the player, she is exactly as well-versed and familiar with her own powers as you are. Naturally, this is because you're playing as an amnesiac with newfound nascent superpowers. However, this game differentiates itself from a lot of other superhero stories and characters, where you instead join at some already established point through their development, after their powers and abilities have already started to bloom and blossom. This is one of the benefits of Gravity Rush being a novel hero IP in comparison to games like Marvel's Spider-Man in 2018, or any of the Arkham games based in the Batman universe, which use a pre-existing protagonist as the primary selling point. Of course, that's not to say that there's no development and improvement of powers in games which begin with an already capable lead character, but there is a distinct appeal to having a game begin with a character who is essentially a blank slate, and joining them for the learning process. One of the benefits of this is that you feel your improvement more tangibly than otherwise. There's no catching up to speak of. It's not like the protagonist had the capacity for more than you were able to do, and was just waiting for you to get on their level. You and Kat function at the same speed, and the game emphatically forgoes the idea of playing catch-up in favour of learning alongside, which plays a huge role in determining how the game deals with pacing, as well as helping to influence how you personally feel about your own improvement as you progress. Thanks to all of this, the development of Kat's powers as the narrative moves forward is mirrored well by your coming to terms with, and subsequent mastery of, the control system. There aren't many good instances that pop to mind of controls and gameplay mechanics feeling almost deliberately incomplete or off-putting, but Gravity Rush has this, and oddly enough, mostly to its benefit. There's a huge discrepancy between controls that are intended to be smooth, yet feel clunky, and what I think we have in this game, which are controls that feel somewhat clunky for a pre-intended purpose. That purpose is simply to line up with what we've said already. It draws a comparison between yours and Kat's abilities, your mutual lack of understanding and control of your situation and power, and affords you the vital opportunity to get accustomed to these seemingly unwieldy controls. Where the game really starts to shine, though, is that your personal acclimatization to these controls ends up matching Kat's increasing comfort with her powers through the narrative. This is what I mean when I say that. Kat as a character doesn't have loads of nuance and depth, and plays comfortably into the typical protagonist "I'm just trying to help" trope. But one way in which her character does develop throughout is to do with her own confidence in her abilities. In the first half of the game, you need to enter these 3 dangerous rifts to help restore lost parts of the map, and you can distinctly see on screen the difference in her approach between the first of these rifts and then the last of these rifts. She starts to exhibit a level of confidence verging on brashness, and this is precisely where Gravity Rush decides to play its best card. Now, I'm not about to claim that a sudden loss of a character's power or ability is by any means a groundbreaking route for a story to take, but the way that this game approaches it lends it at least a modicum of individuality, which again ends up linking to the mirroring between you and Kat that we spoke about before. Immediately after you enter the last of these rifts I just mentioned, the game gives you a little taste of what it's like to have your faculties limited, and you have to manage with much less control over your gravity powers compared to what you're used to. It sounds stupid, but it's basically because your celestial cat got food poisoning. But anyway, this ends up being a real shock to the system, because the trajectory in the game so far, when it comes to your skills and chances to show them off, has only been upwards. After the rift, your cat gets over it, but the limitations that you were forced to endure still linger in the back of your mind. Then, a little while after the game's halfway point, you reach a part where you lose your ability to shift gravity at all, and the difference in how this makes you approach the game is actually quite staggering. This is because it points out just how reliant you are on the game's one benchmark gameplay mechanic. For example, world traversal is entirely based on gravity shifting. Combat is optimally approached by making use of space above your enemy, and as such is based on gravity shifting. And then you're thrust into a situation where this crutch of gravity manipulation is taken away, and you suddenly feel very powerless. You could probably call this something along the lines of intentional disempowerment. Why this is so intelligent comes down to two main things. Firstly, it makes you realise how far you've come since the beginning by parroting the opening section and casting your mind back to your initial acclimatization to the game's mechanics. And secondly, it has a lot of thematic impetus, with your lack of power having a huge impact on how both you and Kat view her usefulness and worth. Although you are totally disempowered at the point we're talking about, it would be wrong not to acknowledge that the game has never given you limitless power. It's not like we've gone from omnipotent to nothing. It's more like you've had your powers taken away just as they were becoming second nature, which has a lot more impact, both emotionally and mechanically. The game's gravity shifting is itself by design slightly clunky, as we mentioned earlier, which leaves you room to improve and adapt, and having it wrest away from you at a moment in which you could really use it makes you realise how intrinsic this mechanic is to your understanding of the world around you, giving you a deep sense of loss when it's missing, but a newfound sense of perspective, freedom and elation when you regain it. You can cast your mind back to clumsily walking around in the opening stages of the game before you can comfortably manipulate your surroundings, and evoking that feeling once more after reaching a point in which you take your skills for granted is a really powerful move on the game's part. Leading on from that, it's worth delving deeper into the thematic impetus behind disempowerment, in particular in the context of a game. It's fair to say that generally the idea of a video game is to empower, not disempower. There's almost no limit to the variety of fantasies and possibilities that games allow you to play out, and that tends to be the biggest selling point, in that as an interactive medium, you can actually be anything you want. The empowerment that Gravity Rush gives you is essentially a form of flight by way of weightlessness, and the benefit of being entirely unencumbered by earthly physical restrictions. So imagine how heavy and ponderous and sluggish you feel, both emotionally and physically, when after unfettered access to the skies, you're once again limited to the confines of regular movement, and forced to fall without any safety net to rely on. You see, Gravity Rush is a game all about shifts in perspective, but perhaps the biggest comes in the form of how you come to view yourself, and in turn Kat, as a result of this newfound disempowerment. You could argue that narratively, this comes off as one of the game's higher points, for lending nuance and complexity to a character who, up to this point, could simply be defined by their primary mechanic. Now, however, you remember that she isn't just a means of manipulating gravity, but she's just a person, not too different from you. This feeling of enforced uselessness is only something you tend to see normalised in horror games, and while Gravity Rush is by no means scary, the idea of sudden powerlessness certainly is. The momentary lack of empowerment in this game has such impact because its potential repercussions extend out of the game. Think back to the first point I made, that you and Kat progress and improve in tandem. This connection still exists at this juncture, but rather than focusing on strength and self-betterment, the tie between you is instead based in fear and impotence. All this narrative insecurity, both within and outside of the game, purely because of the lack of a simple gameplay mechanic. Obviously, you do get your powers back and everything's great again, but the idea of losing your powers once more moves from the back to the forefront of your mind as you play. This is expanded upon in one of the final chapters of the game, in which Kat has a dream reliving this powerlessness, with her starry feline companion split up into myriad pieces. It's an interesting call to add deliberate unease into a game which at its core allows you to play out a power fantasy, but it ends up being to the game's credit. Adding emotional heft to the central mechanic allows the game and the narrative to progress in less of a one-dimensional manner. So, what do we end up with? A realistic sense of ability scaling, leading into eventual mastering of the mechanics and then being slapped with a harsh dose of realism. This is the formula that Gravity Rush is built upon, with everything playing into the overarching dichotomy between power and powerlessness. You're afforded the chance to improve with Kat from the start, to represent that she is at her core just like you. She's a blank slate, provided with a chance to play out a power fantasy. The deliberate clunkiness and acclimatization curve is all there to emphasize your subsequent improvement, and as such, lull you into a false sense of security before the game hits you with its biggest sucker punch, reminding you that when it comes down to it, powerlessness really is the default. But I want to just finish this by saying that Gravity Rush isn't a game mired in hopelessness and nihilism. The point that this game is trying to make by way of this thematic foundation is that power and strength actually come from help and cooperation. Without help, Kat feels pretty useless. With help, she is given the space to develop into a strong, capable, and confident person. This is why the final boss requires you to cooperate with two characters who up to this point have been antagonists more than friends, which helps both Kat and the player realise that in moments of powerlessness, the key to overcoming it is the willingness to ask for and accept help from others. Well, there we are. First things first, I'd like to give a massive thank you to my subscribers on Patreon. Which game I covered for this video was actually decided by a poll I set up on Patreon. So if you're at all interested in having a say on which kind of content you'd like to see on the channel, among other things, please consider checking it out. The link is in the description. I'd also like to quickly say thank you for the wonderful reception on the Final Fantasy I video I released a few weeks back, and that work on the Final Fantasy II video is currently underway. So, if you enjoyed this, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. You could follow me on Twitter if you want more updates from me, the link to that is in the description too. I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments, and if you could share this video around with anyone who you think might be interested, that would be absolutely brilliant. Thank you everyone, and see you next time.